Something doesn't add up anymore. Two people can earn similar incomes, live in the same country, and still experience completely different levels of basic human dignity. In some Canadian communities, clean water flows freely, homes are safe, and infrastructure works. In others, families boil contaminated water, live in mold-infested structures, and watch their children grow up in conditions most Canadians can't imagine. Most people think Canada has moved past this. It hasn't. These conditions exist right now in dozens of communities where homes sell for less than a used car. If you're interested in understanding why some places in one of the world's wealthiest nations quietly resemble developing countries, this channel is built for you. Subscribe now. On the surface, this video might look like it's about cheap real estate, rural poverty, or forgotten places people overlook. But what's really happening runs deeper than geography. Across Canada, systemic neglect, broken treaties, economic abandonment, and infrastructure collapse are quietly creating a two-tier reality. Some communities receive investment, maintenance, and support. Others are left to survive on crumbling systems that haven't been updated in generations. In this video, we'll examine 10 Canadian communities where homes sell for under $50,000 and in some cases under $25,000. There's no ranking, no perfect explanation, and no lifestyle being sold. Each example shows how systemic failure creates extreme affordability alongside dangerous living conditions. Watch all the way through, not for shock value, but to see the full pattern. Housing costs are rising to record levels in Toronto, Vancouver, and major cities across Canada. At the same time, dozens of remote and Indigenous communities face infrastructure crises that have persisted for decades. Governments have promised solutions repeatedly, yet over 30 First Nations communities remain under long-term boil water advisories. Post-industrial towns abandoned after resource extraction has ended sit empty with decaying homes. The result is a paradox: properties selling for almost nothing in a country with a housing crisis. Where you live increasingly determines not just cost, but whether you have access to clean water, safe shelter, and basic services. This isn't ancient history. It's happening now. Number 10. Attawapiskat First Nation, Ontario. This community makes headlines for housing conditions that shouldn't exist in Canada, yet they persist year after year. Attawapiskat sits on the remote shores of James Bay, accessible only by winter ice road or expensive flights. Daily life here involves navigating extreme housing shortages, with multiple families crowding into single homes. Routines include checking for mold growth, managing without indoor plumbing in some structures, and boiling water during advisories. It's not isolated by choice, but by geography and systemic neglect. Population trend: stable around 2,000 despite crisis conditions. Housing reality: severe shortage with families living in unheated shacks, trailers, and condemned structures. Properties have minimal market value due to reserve land status. Cost pressure: food costs 2 to 3 times Southern Ontario prices due to fly-in supply chains. Heating costs are extreme during 8-month winters. Work reality: limited local employment beyond band administration and seasonal work. Remote work is hampered by unreliable internet. Incentives or limits: federal funding consistently falls short of actual infrastructure needs. Unexpected detail: despite uninhabitable conditions, no market exists for buying or selling individual properties due to communal land ownership. People here measure survival by making it through another winter with their families intact, not by financial freedom. The trade-off isn't fewer choices. It's living in conditions that violate basic housing standards while lacking the ability to simply move due to cultural ties and economic barriers. Imagine waking up in a home where black mold covers the walls, your children sleep 3 to a bed, and you can't access clean drinking water without boiling it first. Could this kind of reality be invisible to most Canadians? Number 9. Pikangikum First Nation, Ontario. This community demonstrates how infrastructure failure creates health emergencies disguised as housing affordability. Pikangikum is a fly-in Ojibwe community in northwestern Ontario, where over 80% of homes lack indoor plumbing. Daily routines involve hauling water, using outdoor facilities in sub-zero temperatures, and managing without basic sanitation systems. Life moves between survival tasks rather than comfortable routines. Population trend: Growing younger population creating additional housing pressure. Housing reality, severe overcrowding with 15-20 people sharing homes designed for 5. No real estate market exists in the traditional sense. Cost pressure. Diesel fuel for generators costs triple southern prices. Food inflation reaches 200-300%. Work reality. Unemployment exceeds 70% with limited wage economy. Incentives or limits. Chronic underfunding of infrastructure creates wait lists for basic housing lasting years. Unexpected detail. The community has declared multiple states of emergency, yet conditions remain largely unchanged. Residents measure quality of life by whether their children stay warm and fed, not by property values or investment potential. The reality isn't trading convenience for savings. It's enduring conditions that constitute a human rights crisis while being offered no viable alternatives. Imagine planning your day around whether you can access running water and explaining to your children why their school closes repeatedly due to infrastructure failures. Does extreme affordability matter when basic dignity is absent? Number 8. Elliot Lake, Ontario. This community shows what happens when single industry towns collapse and never recover. Elliot Lake once thrived as a uranium mining center with 18,000 residents. Today, fewer than 11,000 remain in a town marketed to retirees seeking rock-bottom living costs. Daily life is quiet, with closed storefronts, limited services, and a community still processing decades of economic decline. Population trend, aging and slowly shrinking as younger generations leave. Housing reality, median home prices $90,000, $150,000 for full properties. Some homes list under $50,000 requiring significant renovation. Cost pressure, property taxes remain high despite low home values to maintain oversized infrastructure. Limited shopping options increase costs. Work reality, minimal employment beyond healthcare for seniors and remaining service jobs. Remote work offers the only growth opportunity. Incentives or limits. Town actively recruits retirees with low-cost housing campaigns. Unexpected detail. The 2012 mall roof collapse that killed 2 people symbolized the town's infrastructure decay. People here measure stability by stretching pensions further than they would elsewhere, accepting isolation and limited amenities as the price. The trade-off is living in a community that peaked decades ago and hasn't found a sustainable path forward. Imagine retiring to a town where your home costs less than your car, but the nearest specialist doctor requires a 2-hour drive and businesses continue closing each year. Could financial savings compensate for declining infrastructure? Number 7. Bearskin Lake, First Nation, Ontario. This community illustrates how geographic isolation compounds systemic infrastructure failure. Bearskin Lake is a remote Oji Cree community accessible only by winter road or chartered aircraft. Daily life revolves around managing long-term boil water advisories, housing shortages, and the constant expense of isolation. Social structures remain strong, but physical infrastructure crumbles. Population trend. Young and growing population creating unsustainable housing pressure. Housing reality. Chronic shortage means extended families share inadequate space. No conventional real estate market exists. Cost pressure. Diesel fuel for power generation costs 300-400% more than grid electricity. All supplies arrive by expensive air freight or seasonal winter road. Work reality. Limited wage employment beyond band operations and teaching positions. Incentives or limits. Federal infrastructure funding cycles through announcements without resolving core water treatment problems. Unexpected detail. Despite repeated government commitments, the boil water advisory persists year after year. Residents measure their lives by maintaining cultural identity and keeping families together despite systems designed to fail them. The reality isn't choosing affordability over amenities. It's being trapped in conditions created by colonial policy and contemporary neglect. Imagine explaining to outsiders that in 2026, you still can't drink water from your tap, and your government has been promising to fix it for over a decade. Does property value even register as relevant? Number 6. Iroquois Falls, Ontario. This community represents the slow decline of northern resource towns after industry restructuring. Iroquois Falls was built around paper mills that once employed the majority of residents. Now, the mill operates at reduced capacity with skeleton crews, and the town faces steady population loss. Daily life involves watching more neighbors leave each year while maintaining hope for economic revival that may never come. Population trend, declining from 5,000 to under 4,500 with accelerating outward migration. Housing reality, homes sell for $100,000, $160,000 with some properties under $50,000. Many sit vacant for months. Cost pressure. Heating costs remain extreme during long winters. Limited retail competition keeps daily expenses higher than expected. Work reality. Paper mill jobs contracted dramatically. Service sector and seasonal work dominate. Remote work adoption remains limited. Incentives or limits. Municipal services face cuts as tax base shrinks. Infrastructure maintenance falls behind. Unexpected detail. Schools have closed and consolidated as student populations decline by nearly 30%. People here measure success by whether they can afford to stay in a community they love, even as economic logic suggests leaving. The trade-off is accepting diminishing opportunities and watching their town fade in slow motion. Imagine buying a home for less than a down payment in Toronto, but knowing your children will likely need to move away to find career opportunities. Does affordability matter when the future feels uncertain? Number 5. Fond du Lac de Nessulin First Nation, Saskatchewan. This community demonstrates how extreme northern isolation creates dependency despite resource wealth beneath the land. Fond du Lac sits at the eastern tip of Lake Attawapiskat, accessible only by winter ice road or float plane. Daily life involves managing inadequate water treatment systems, diesel power generation, and prices that make basic living expenses astronomical. Population trend, stable around 900 residents with limited mobility options. Housing reality, chronic shortage with multi-generational crowding common. No conventional property market exists on reserve land. Cost pressure, food costs 3 to 4 times southern prices. A single grocery trip can cost $800, $1,000 for basic supplies. Heating costs consume massive portions of household budgets. Work reality, limited employment beyond band administration, school, and nursing station. Traditional land-based activities supplement but can't replace wage income. Incentives or limits. Decades-long boil water advisory due to outdated water treatment infrastructure. Federal funding inadequate for modern system installation. Unexpected detail. Despite living near uranium deposits and resource extraction activity, the community sees minimal economic benefit. Residents measure wealth by community connection and land-based knowledge, not cash or property values that mean nothing in their context. The reality isn't choosing simplicity, it's enduring systemic failure while maintaining cultural survival. Imagine living where groceries cost quadruple city prices, you can't drink tap water safely, and your government calls this acceptable. Does the concept of affordability even apply? Number 4. Cobalt, Ontario. This community shows what remains after boom and bust resource extraction ends permanently. Cobalt experienced silver mining wealth over a century ago, then gradual abandonment as ore deposits depleted. Today, 100 residents remain in a town filled with historic buildings slowly decaying. Daily life is quiet, nostalgic, and economically stagnant. Population trend, declining steadily with aging demographics and youth outmigration. Housing reality, average home prices around $155,000 with properties under $50,000 available requiring renovation. Many heritage buildings sit empty. Cost pressure, property taxes disproportionate to services received. Limited shopping requires travel to larger centers. Work reality, minimal local employment beyond small businesses serving residents. Tourism provides seasonal income. Remote work offers the only growth sector. Incentives or limits. Heritage designation protects buildings, but limits redevelopment options. Unexpected detail. Abandoned mine sites create environmental hazards and limit land use options. People here measure their lives by connection to history and slower pace, accepting that prosperity ended generations ago. The trade-off is living in a museum of what was, with limited prospects for what could be. Imagine owning a century-old home for less than a year's rent in Toronto. but watching your town's population decline year after year with no reversal in sight. Is cheap housing enough? Number 3. Wapekeka First Nation, Ontario. This community reveals how infrastructure crisis combines with mental health emergency in Canada's remote north. Wapekeka is a fly-in Ojibwe community that declared a state of emergency after youth suicide attempts and deaths. Daily life involves not just managing boil water advisories and housing shortages, but surviving psychological trauma from systemic hopelessness. Population trend: young population facing intergenerational trauma and limited futures. Housing reality: severe shortage creates dangerous overcrowding. No property market exists in conventional terms. Cost pressure: food costs 250–300% higher than southern Ontario. All supplies fly in at extreme expense. Work reality: unemployment rate exceeds 80%. Wage economy barely exists. Incentives or limits: water treatment system failures persist despite federal attention. Infrastructure funding arrives too slowly. Unexpected detail: international media coverage of suicide crisis brought temporary attention, but structural conditions remain largely unchanged. Residents measure survival by whether their children make it to adulthood, not by financial metrics that seem absurdly disconnected from their reality. The situation isn't about trade-offs or choices, it's about enduring colonial legacy effects while struggling for basic human dignity. Imagine living where clean water remains unavailable, hope feels scarce, and your young people are dying at rates that would trigger national emergencies elsewhere. Does housing affordability have any meaning here? Number 2. Shoal River Indian Reserve, Manitoba. This community exemplifies the pattern repeated across dozens of First Nations. Remote location, inadequate infrastructure, persistent water quality problems, and systemic underfunding. Shoal River sits in northwestern Manitoba, accessible by winter road or air. Daily life involves managing without reliable services most Canadians consider basic rights. Population trend: stable with limited ability to relocate despite challenging conditions. Housing reality: chronic shortage means families double up in inadequate structures. Reserve land status prevents conventional real estate markets. Cost pressure: diesel fuel prices make power generation extremely expensive. Food costs reach 200 to 300% above Winnipeg prices. Work reality: limited wage employment creates dependence on transfer payments and traditional activities. Incentives or limits: water quality issues persist due to treatment system inadequacies. Federal funding insufficient for comprehensive infrastructure upgrades. Unexpected detail: community members must choose between paying for heat or food during harsh winters. People here measure life quality by cultural continuity and family bonds, not by economic indicators that fail to capture their reality. The situation isn't about affordability versus amenities, it's about surviving conditions that constitute systemic discrimination. Imagine raising children where winter temperatures drop below -40, your water isn't reliably safe, and employment opportunities are essentially non-existent. Does cheap housing matter when dignity is absent? Number 1. Rural Saskatchewan ghost town properties. These locations represent complete economic and infrastructure abandonment. Scattered across the prairies are properties in nearly abandoned towns, where homes sell for $15,000, $25,000, or sit empty waiting for anyone willing to take them. Daily life in these places barely exists. Communities have dwindled to handfuls of elderly residents clinging to land their families farmed for generations. Population trend: collapse to under 5,100 residents in towns that once had thousands. Housing reality: properties sell for less than used cars, often requiring complete reconstruction. Some are given away free. Cost pressure: no municipal services remain. Water wells, septic systems, heating all fall to individual owners. Grocery shopping requires 60 to 100-kilometer drives. Work reality: no local employment exists. Even remote work requires internet infrastructure these places lack. Incentives or limits: Some municipalities offer free land and tax breaks to anyone willing to build. Unexpected detail: many properties are structurally sound but have zero market value because infrastructure and community have completely disappeared. The few remaining residents measure their lives by attachment to land and refusal to abandon family legacies, not by rational economic calculation. The situation isn't a trade-off. It's the end stage of depopulation where property becomes worthless despite physical existence. Imagine buying a house for the price of a laptop, then realizing you're the only person under 70 for 50 kilometers, and the nearest hospital is an hour away. Is ultimate affordability worth complete isolation? What matters isn't being shocked by individual stories. It's recognizing how systemic patterns create these conditions. Most Canadians assume housing affordability problems mean prices are too high everywhere. The reality is more complex and more disturbing. Extreme affordability in Canada correlates with infrastructure failure, geographic isolation, economic abandonment, or systemic marginalization of Indigenous communities. These aren't market inefficiencies waiting to be exploited. They're symptoms of broken systems, colonial legacy, and policy failure. Clean water shouldn't be a privilege based on location. Safe housing shouldn't depend on ethnicity or proximity to major cities. When homes sell for $21,000, it's not a bargain. It's evidence something has gone catastrophically wrong. True cost of living includes access to dignity, safety, opportunity, and basic services. Affordability without livability isn't a housing solution. It's a human rights crisis hiding in plain sight. This channel exists to examine real Canadian community realities without romanticizing struggle or exploiting crisis. If you value understanding over outrage and long-term systemic thinking over quick judgments, you'll find depth here. These patterns matter because they reveal how systems actually function beneath official narratives. This is Loving Canadian Towns, and there's much more to explore. Subscribe now.